Today's Maya Angelou poem is another one that I found very beautiful, and I could say that about every single one of her poems. This is the volume that I'm pulling them from. And because of the theme of today's video, I wanted to share one that I thought was beautifully written, and this one is called Late October. Carefully the leaves of autumn sprinkle down the tinny sound of little dyings, and skies sated of ruddy sunsets, of roseate dawns, roil ceaselessly in cobwebs, gray and turn to black for comfort. Only lovers see the fall, a signal end to endings, a gruffish gesture alerting those who will not be alarmed that we begin to stop in order simply to begin again. Hey BookTube, it's Kim at Middle of the Book March, and today's video is a video about books that are beautifully written. And I shamelessly stole this idea from Brian at Bookish. I told him in advance. Thank you, Brian, for letting me steal this video idea. I just loved it. Brian, I will post Brian's video link down below, and I loved his video. I loved the whole idea of it. And I thought, what a great idea. It's such a positive video, such a positive topic, talking about books with beautiful writing. And I could have gone on endlessly with innumerable books. I don't even know. I didn't count how many I picked. I think I have 8 or 9 here. My video might be a little longer than my normal videos. I don't care if you don't. So I'm going to talk to you about this pile of books, and I'm going to read you short passages to hopefully communicate to you how beautifully these books are written. And they're all beautiful for different reasons. Some of them are very tough, some of them are raw, and some of them are horrifying, some of them are peaceful and lovely and emotional. Some of them are masterfully written in strong language. And there's so many different reasons why I love these books. My reading style, the books that I will ultimately give a 5-star rating to, have a lot of qualifications, but one of my very top qualifications is beautiful writing. It could be powerful writing, it could be extremely strong writing, it could be the artistry and format of what the author is trying to do. But I will talk about each of these books individually once I get to them. The first one is an interesting one. This is a play, and it is Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. Now, in a play, it's mostly dialogue, but in the beginning of the acts, there's a description of the scene, and I wanted to read the description right before Act 1. Act 1, Scene 1. It's setting the stage. The younger living room would be a comfortable and well-ordered room if it were not for a number of indestructible contradictions to the state of being. Its furnishings are typical and undistinguished, and their primary feature now is that they have clearly had to accommodate the living of too many people for too many years, and they are tired. Still, we can see that at some time, a time probably no longer remembered by the family, except perhaps for Mama, the furnishings of this room were actually selected with care and love and even hope, and brought to this apartment and arranged with taste and pride. That was a long time ago. Now the once-loved pattern of the couch upholstery has to fight to show itself from under acres of crocheted doilies and couch covers, which have themselves finally come to be more important than the upholstery. If that doesn't give you the mental picture of the setting of this play, A Raisin in the Sun, I don't know what would. Because the description that Hansberry uses to throw the reader into this home life, into this family's apartment, I think it's just beautiful. Why wouldn't you think that was beautiful? Another one, this is a book that has blown me away. This is a fantastic book on audio. If you have the chance to listen to this book on audio, it is Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. I read this in print. I listened to the audio, which is narrated by Ruby Dee. It is phenomenal. And if you listen to the audio and read the book at the same time, it gives you such a deeper, thicker understanding because of the language. There's a lot of colloquialisms, and it can be difficult, but it is so beautiful and shining on audio. Audio can be shining, you know what I'm trying to say. Let me read you the very beginning. And a lot of these books that I think are written beautifully, I only had to go to the first page to find the language that I was looking for that gave me chills. This is page number 1, chapter 1. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men. Now, women forget all those things they don't want to remember, and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is truth. Then they act and do things accordingly. So the beginning of this was a woman, and she had come back from burying the dead. Not the dead of sick and ailing with friends at the pillow and feet. She had come back from the sodden and the bloated, the sudden dead, their eyes flung wide open in judgment. And that is a foreshadowing of what is to come at the end of this book. It is just a beautiful, beautiful book, beautiful novel, beautiful story. In Brian's video, he talked about the novel Sula from Toni Morrison, which is also one of my favorite Morrison novels. But my ultimate favorite is Beloved, which is, and I think Brian and I agree on this, quite possibly the greatest American novel ever written, or one of the top 5 at least. But Beloved is just a beautifully harrowing, terrifying story. And Morrison was such a master at the craft of writing. And again, this one, I picked a passage just kind of at random. I could open any page and just find beauty on every page, beauty and fear and rage and peace. It's just a very weird combination of emotions in this book. He looked at her then closely, closer than he had when she first rounded the house on wet and shining legs, holding her shoes and stockings up in one hand, her skirts in the other. Hallie's girl, the one with iron eyes and backbone to match. He had never seen her hair in Kentucky, and though her face was 18 years older than when last he saw her, it was softer now, because of the hair. A face too still for comfort, irises the same color as her skin, which in that still face used to make him think of a mask with mercifully punched-out eyes. Hallie's woman. Pregnant every year, including the year she sat by the fire telling him she was going to run. Her 3 children she had already packed into a wagon load of others in a caravan of Negroes crossing the river. They were to be left with Hallie's mother near Cincinnati. Even in that tiny shack, leaning so close to the fire you could smell the heat in her dress, her eyes did not pick up a flicker of light. There are times when I've read a book or I read a passage like that and I have to pause and blink a few times because the beauty of the language is overwhelming to me. And it's interesting because quite often a lot of the books that I get very emotional with is because of the writing. And not always because of the story, but if it's a combination of writing and story, then I cry. Then the tears actually come down. Here is another one of my favorite books. And again, I went right to the first page, and it's I could open it anywhere and find something to talk about. This is Amanda Copland's The Orchardist. This is not a very well-known novel on BookTube. I know that Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading absolutely loves this book, as do I. We have a few books like that in common, and another one is in my pile. But this is The Orchardist. And on the very first page, his face was pitted as the moon. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and thick without being stocky, though one could see how he would pass into stockiness. He had already taken on the barrel-chested sturdiness of an old man. His ears were elephantine, a feature most commented on when he was younger, when the ears stuck out from his head. But now they had darkened like the rest of his sun-exposed flesh, and lay against his skull more than at any other time in his life, and were tough, the flesh granular like the rind of some fruit. He was clean-shaven, large-pored, his skin was oily. In some lights his flesh was gray, others tallow, others red. His lips were the same color as his face, had given way to the overall visage, had begun to disappear. His nose was large, bulbous. His eyes were cornflower blue. His eyelashes nothing to speak of now, but when he was young, they were thick black, and his cheeks bloomed, and his lips were as pure and sculpted as a cherub. There's moments of description where she's describing something that is not necessarily something that's very beautiful or even pleasant, but the way she writes it, the way she describes is just sublime, sublime. This is a book that I just finished recently. It is The Wall by Marlon Haushofer, translated from German by Sean Whiteside. And this is an interesting pick because this is not a book filled with beautiful writing. It's not a book that you can open to any page and find beauty in the writing. It's very spare and ordinary and quiet at times, but she surprised me because I would read a page and be completely dumbstruck by the profound content. And one of the pages, I dog-eared so many of them, and I'm trying to find the one I wanted to read. Here, the very first one. If I think today of the woman I once was, the woman with the little double chin who tried very hard to look younger than her age, I feel little sympathy for her, but I shouldn't like to judge her too harshly. After all, she never had the chance of consciously shaping her life. When she was young, she unwittingly assumed a heavy burden by starting a family, and from then on she was always hemmed in by an intimidating amount of duties and worries. Only a giantess would have been able to free herself, and in no respect was she a giantess, never anything other than a tormented, overtaxed woman of medium intelligence, in a world, on top of everything else, that was hostile to women, and which women found strange and unsettling. That's just one very early example in this book of the passages that blew me over. And it was those types of pages that kept me going with this book during the times when I thought there's nothing happening. There's nothing happening. It's the same stuff day after day after day. And there's a very good reason for that. But if you can't see this, but all of these dog ears are different passages that I just could not get over. This is going to be a weird one if you have read this book already, but this is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. It's translated from Spanish by Sophie Hughes. This is a terrifying book to read. It is one of the more raw and filthy stories I've ever read. It is degrading and dangerous and terrifying, but Melchor's writing, oh my gosh. And again, this is page 1, very first page, very first passage. They reached the canal along the track leading up from the river, their slingshots drawn for battle and their eyes squinting, almost stitched together in the midday glare. There were 5 of them, their ringleader the only one in swimming trunks, red shorts that blazed behind the parched crops of the cane fields, still low in early May. The rest of the troop trailed behind him in their underwear, all 4 caked in mud up to their shins, all 4 taking turns to carry the pail of small rocks they'd taken from the river that morning. All 4 scowling and fierce and so ready to give themselves up for the cause that not even the youngest, bringing up the rear, would have dared admit he was scared. The elastic of his slingshot pulled taut in his hands, the rock snug in the leather pad, primed to strike anything that got in his way at the very first sign of an ambush. Be that the caw of the bientiveo, perched unseen like a guard in the trees behind them, the rustle of leaves being thrashed aside, or the whoosh of a rock cleaving the air just beyond their noses. The breeze warm and the almost white sky thick with ethereal birds of prey and a terrible smell that hit them harder than a fistful of sand in the face. A stench that made them want to hawk it up before it reached their guts, that made them want to stop and turn around. That is the beginning of a very harrowing part of the story in the very beginning of the book, but just so magnificently written. This next one, I have talked ad nauseum about this book, and no, it's not Middlemarch. I've read this book. This is, I think, the book I've read the most in my lifetime. This is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and I did a read-along for this on BookTube. I actually read this twice in the time that I've been on BookTube, but I did a video read-along of this book and have highlighted and have dog-eared so many pages. I love Wuthering Heights. It is a gothic story of obsession and fury and an obsessive love gone strange and gone bad. And let me get to the passage that I want to read. It could possibly be the very first one. And it is not. Let me get to the one I want. All right, here's a passage that I love. Volume 2, Chapter 1. He neither spoke nor loosed his hold for some 5 minutes, during which period he bestowed more kisses than ever he gave in his life before, I dare say. But then my mistress had kissed him first, and I plainly saw that he could hardly bear for downright agony to look into her face. The same conviction had stricken him as me, from the instant he beheld her, that there was no prospect of ultimate recovery there. She was fated, sure to die. This entire book is just mesmerizing to me, and it's one of the classics on my shelves that I adore and just absolutely love it. This one I reread last year, I think. Evidence of Things Unseen by Marianne Wiggins. This I read years ago for my book group, and I think, if I remember correctly, we all just absolutely fell in love with this book. And it's the very first page. This is a book set in the Atomic Age, and it is Knoxville, Tennessee, and these men working in a nuclear program in the Oak Ridge Laboratory, Site X, in the government's race to build the bomb. This is page number 1, and each chapter has a title, and this one is White Sands. Somewhere in the heart of North America, there is a desert where the heat of several suns has fused the particles of sand into a single sheet of glass, so dazzling it sends a constant signal to the moon. On a map, this unmarked space looks like a printer's error, an empty region on a page that a cartographer forgot. One way or another, each of us is drawn to this forbidden place. Like a magnet, this glass desert calls our irons the way the whale's heart used to beckon a harpoon. In our dreams or in our fears, we imagine what it must be like to walk upon this surface. We imagine we could balance there like an angel lighting down on ice, glissade perhaps, without cracking its thin shell with the weight of our existence. This desert's name is Trinity. I can't say enough how much I absolutely love this book. I've read it a couple of times. Again, it's not very well known, but it is magnificent. And this is one of those books that in a very old video of mine, I said, I always know where this is on my shelf, because if I have to run out of here in a fire, I'm going to grab, that'll be one of maybe 3 books I'm going to grab. And I have a whole shelf of just George Eliot, so I can quickly get Middlemarch out of there. Speaking of George Eliot, I do not have Middlemarch with me. I leave Middlemarch purposely out of these types of contests because I can't possibly hold any of the book up against it. But this one is her first published book. This is a collection of 3 novellas, and it is Scenes of Clerical Life. Why do you ask that I pick this one? Because the very first page struck me, and I laughed, and I thought how beautiful the writing is. And this is after I read Middlemarch that I picked up Scenes of Clerical Life. The very first novella is The Sad Fortunes of the Reverend Amos Barton. Chapter 1. Shepperton Church was a very different-looking building 25 years ago. To be sure, its substantial stone tower looks at you through its intelligent eye. The clock with the friendly expression of former days, but in everything else, what changes? Now there is a wide span of slated roof flanking the old steeple. The windows are tall and symmetrical. The outer doors are resplendent with oak graining. The inner door is reverentially noiseless with a garment of red baize, and the walls, you are convinced, no lichen will ever again affect a settlement on. They are smooth and in nutrient as the summit of the Reverend Amos Barton's head, after 10 years of baldness and supererogatory soap. I don't even know what that word means. I'd have to Google it, look it up. I love Eliot's writing, all of her writing, in every single book she's ever published. The last book, again, Kelly and I have this book in common that we both adore. We buddy read it. I've read it several times. It is a paperback that I have dog-eared relentlessly, And this is Now in November by Josephine Johnson. She was the youngest Pulitzer Prize winner at 24 years old. And this was published in 1934. It's in reprint, and I beg you to go and run and buy this book. You will not be sorry. Take my word for it. Take Kelly's word for it. And I've hopefully swayed so many other booktubers and viewers to read this book. It is phenomenal. It is gorgeous in its writing. It is sad, and what other word can I use? Gosh, I don't even know. Sad is just not a good enough word to talk about this book. It's beautifully written, but it's so emotional. It's so thick with emotion on every page. It's so thick with setting and character and personality. And it's a very short book, but so emotionally dense and artistic. It's just absolutely beautiful. So let's see, what can I read for you? Page 10. I didn't have anything to say. I was afraid to start probing again about the knife. Nothing was changed, but the afternoon seemed cold and chilly. Merle started off down the hill. She was always thinking of Mother having to do the work alone and was always the first to start at whatever there needed to be done. Something was in her even then that kept walking foot after foot down a straight path to some clear place, and I wished then, and still do, that there was something in me also that would march steadily in one road instead of down here or there or somewhere else, the mind running a net of rabbit paths that twisted and turned and doubled on themselves, pursued always by the hawk shadow of doubt. But even though I despised myself, it seemed that earth was no less beautiful or less given to me in my littleness than to Merle, who had twice as much of good in her. And it seemed unjust and strange, but would probably balance up one day. Please go buy this beautiful book. And if you do and read it and think it is gorgeous in its writing, let me know, please. I'm begging you to spend your money. Those are some of the very many books, beautifully written, that I love, that I own on my shelves. I had such a hard time picking some of the ones that I loved the most. I could probably add 20, 30 more to the I love these the most books. But that's just a very quick, small example of books that I believe are so beautifully written. Brian, thank you so much for opening this topic. Everybody let me know in the comments below what you think, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye, everybody.